Let me ask you something. How much of your life are you actually living, and how much of it are you thinking about living? How many opportunities have you talked yourself out of? How many mornings have you woken up with a plan, only to spend the day thinking about whether you should actually do it? How many times have you said, I'll start tomorrow, when you feel more confident? Tomorrow, when you have more money. Tomorrow, when you know exactly what to do. Tomorrow, when you're no longer afraid. But here's the problem. Tomorrow keeps moving, and while you're waiting for the perfect moment to begin, your life is happening right now. You don't need another year to think about it. You don't need another 100 opinions. You don't need to analyze every possible outcome. You need to move, because overthinking doesn't make you safer. Sometimes it simply keeps you stuck. You can think yourself out of almost anything. You can think yourself out of applying for the job. You can think yourself out of starting the business. You can think yourself out of making the phone call. You can think yourself out of leaving the situation that is draining you. You can even think yourself out of becoming the person you know you're capable of becoming. And the scary part is that overthinking often feels productive. You're researching, you're planning, you're imagining, you're preparing, you're asking questions, you're making lists, you're considering possibilities. But eventually, preparation becomes procrastination when it never turns into action. There comes a moment when thinking has done everything it can do. Action has to take over. You don't need to know the entire path. You only need to know the next step. That's it, the next step. Not the next 10 years, not the entire plan, not every obstacle you're going to face, just the next move, because your brain will always give you reasons to wait. It will say, what if it doesn't work?
What if people judge you?
What if you fail? What if you make the wrong decision? But here's a question you need to ask yourself. What if it does work? What if the thing you're afraid to begin becomes the thing that changes your life? What if the person you're trying to become is waiting on the other side of one uncomfortable decision? What if your biggest problem isn't that you don't have opportunities? What if your biggest problem is that you're thinking about those opportunities instead of taking them? You don't need to eliminate fear before you act. You need to learn how to act while fear is present. Fear doesn't always mean stop. Sometimes fear simply means, this matters to me. Think about the last time you did something difficult. Maybe you didn't feel ready. Maybe your hands were shaking. Maybe you doubted yourself. Maybe you wanted to quit, but you did it anyway. And afterward, you realized something. The fear was bigger in your imagination than it was in reality. That's what overthinking does. It takes a possibility and turns it into a disaster movie. One unanswered message becomes, they hate me. One mistake becomes, I'm terrible at this. One rejection becomes, I'll never succeed. One bad day becomes, my entire life is falling apart. Your mind can create stories that feel completely real, but a thought is not a fact. A feeling is not always a prediction, and fear is not always a warning. Sometimes it's simply your brain trying to protect you from uncertainty. But growth requires uncertainty. Every meaningful change in your life will require you to step into something you haven't experienced before. You cannot become confident by waiting until you feel confident. You become confident by keeping promises to yourself. You become confident by taking action. You become confident by discovering that you can handle things you once believed you couldn't. Self-trust is built through evidence. Every time you say, I'm going to do this, and then you do it, you teach yourself. I can trust myself. Every time you stop making excuses and take the next step, you build evidence. Every time you do something uncomfortable, instead of avoiding it, you become stronger, and eventually something changes. You stop asking, can I do this? And you start saying, I'll figure it out. That is a powerful way to live, not because you know everything, but because you trust yourself enough to learn. You don't need to have all the answers. You need to become the kind of person who can find answers. You need to become the kind of person who can adapt. The kind of person who can make mistakes without destroying their identity. The kind of person who can fail without deciding that failure is permanent. Because one of the greatest traps of overthinking is believing that every decision is permanent. It isn't. You can adjust. You can learn. You can change direction. You can try again. You can start over. You can make a better decision tomorrow because of what you learned today. Stop demanding perfection from yourself before you allow yourself to begin. Your first attempt doesn't need to be perfect. Your first video doesn't need to be perfect. Your first business idea doesn't need to be perfect. Your first workout doesn't need to be perfect. Your first conversation doesn't need to be perfect. Your first step simply needs to happen because action creates information. You can sit in your room for 6 months trying to figure out whether something will work, or you can spend 6 days actually doing it and learn more than your imagination could ever teach you. Action gives you feedback. Action reveals what works. Action reveals what doesn't. Action gives you experience. And experience gives you clarity. That's why sometimes the answer you're looking for isn't another thought, it's movement. Move your body, make the call, send the email, open the document, apply for the opportunity, take the class, start the project, have the conversation, go outside, do something that moves your life forward, even if it's tiny. Because small actions create momentum, and momentum is powerful. You don't have to transform your entire life today. You just have to stop abandoning yourself every time something feels uncomfortable. Think about that. How often have you promised yourself you would change? And then the moment it became difficult, you went back to the old pattern. You told yourself you would exercise. Then you missed a day. And instead of saying, I'll start again tomorrow, you said, I always quit. You planned to work on your dream. Then you became tired, and instead of taking a small step, you decided you weren't disciplined enough. You made one mistake, and instead of correcting it, you attacked yourself. This is where you have to change the conversation in your head. Stop turning temporary setbacks into permanent identities. You are not your worst day. You are not your last mistake. You are not your fear. You are not your hesitation. You are a person who can choose again, and you can choose again right now. You don't have to wait for Monday. You don't have to wait for January. You don't have to wait until everything is organized. You don't need a perfect morning routine. You don't need a perfect 5-year plan. You need a decision. I'm done waiting. I'm done waiting until I feel fearless. I'm done waiting until everyone approves. I'm done waiting until I know exactly how everything will work. I'm done sacrificing today's life for some imaginary perfect future. Because your life is not waiting somewhere in the distance. Your life is happening now. This moment matters. This conversation matters. This decision matters. The person you become through today's choices matters. And maybe you've been thinking too much because you're afraid of making the wrong choice. But here's something you need to understand. Sometimes not choosing is also a choice. Staying stuck is a choice. Delaying is a choice. Avoiding is a choice. And every day you make those choices, you reinforce the same life. If you want a different life, eventually you have to make different choices. Not massive choices every day, small ones. Instead of scrolling, create. Instead of complaining, solve. Instead of waiting, begin. Instead of asking for permission, take responsibility. Instead of saying, I can't, ask, what's one thing I can do? That question can change everything because I can't closes the door. But what's one thing I can do opens it. Maybe you can't change your entire situation today, but you can change what you do for the next 10 minutes. Maybe you can't build the entire business today, but you can write the first page. Maybe you can't become completely confident today, but you can do one thing that makes you proud. Maybe you can't solve your entire future, but you can take care of today. That's enough. Stop making your future responsible for fixing your present. Your future is built from what you repeatedly do today, And the life you want isn't created by one giant decision. It's created through hundreds of small decisions. Wake up, move, work, learn, try, fail, adjust, continue, repeat. That's how change happens. Not through constantly thinking about becoming different, through repeatedly behaving differently. And there's another thing you need to stop doing. Stop asking everyone else what you should do with your life. Advice can be valuable. But if you constantly outsource your decisions, eventually you lose connection with your own judgment. Listen to people, learn from people, get advice, but then come back to yourself. Ask, what do I actually want? What matters to me? What kind of person do I want to become?
Choice would I make if I trusted myself?
That last question is powerful. What would I do if I trusted myself? Maybe you would finally start. Maybe you would finally leave. Maybe you would finally apply. Maybe you would finally speak. Maybe you would finally forgive yourself. Maybe you would finally stop chasing approval. Maybe you would finally give yourself permission to become someone new. You don't need everybody to understand your next chapter. You need to live it. Some people will not understand your growth. Some people will be uncomfortable with your boundaries. Some people may question your choices. That's okay. You are not here to make everyone comfortable with your evolution. You are here to live your life. And living requires participation. You cannot watch your life from the sidelines forever. At some point, you have to step onto the field. You have to take the risk. You have to try. You have to experience. You have to make decisions. You have to allow yourself to be a beginner, because being a beginner is not embarrassing. Refusing to begin because you're afraid of looking inexperienced is what keeps people stuck. Nobody starts as an expert. Every successful person was once confused. Every confident person was once uncertain. Every skilled person was once terrible at the thing they eventually mastered. The difference is that they kept going. They didn't wait to become good before they started. They started, and starting made them good. So stop overthinking the beginning. Start badly if you have to. Start scared. Start uncertain.
Start with 10 minutes. Start with one page.
Start with one phone call. Start with one workout. Start with one decision. But start. Because one day you will look back at this version of yourself and you will either say, I'm so glad I finally started, or I wish I had started sooner. Don't let fear write that second sentence for you. You have already spent enough time thinking. You've analyzed enough. You've imagined enough. You've worried enough. Now it's time to participate. Your life is waiting for you. Not the perfect version of you, not the fearless version, not the version with all the answers. You, exactly as you are, with your doubts, with your imperfections, with your uncertainty, with your dreams, with everything you've learned. You don't need to become someone else before you begin. You begin and then you become. So when this speech ends, don't just feel inspired. Do something. Pick one thing you've been avoiding, one thing, and take the smallest possible action toward it. Don't negotiate with yourself for an hour. Don't build another complicated plan. Don't wait for motivation. Move. Because motivation often follows action. And the moment you move, you create evidence that you are not stuck. You are capable of changing direction. You are capable of making decisions. You are capable of handling discomfort. You are capable of beginning again. And maybe that's what you needed to hear today. You are allowed to begin again. You are allowed to change your mind. You are allowed to make mistakes. You are allowed to take your time. You are allowed to want more. You are allowed to stop living according to fear. You are allowed to choose yourself. And you are allowed to build a life that actually feels like yours. So take a breath. Stop asking for certainty. Stop waiting for permission. Stop trying to predict every possible outcome. Look at what is directly in front of you and take the next step. Not tomorrow, not someday. Now. Because your life isn't waiting for you to become fearless. Your life is waiting for you to become willing, Willing to try, willing to fail, willing to learn, willing to move, willing to trust yourself. And once you start moving, you may discover something incredible. The life you were waiting for wasn't waiting somewhere far away. It was being built by every small action you were brave enough to take. So stop overthinking, stop postponing, stop living in imaginary futures. Come back to today, come back to this moment, and choose one thing, then do it. Your future self is watching, your possibilities are waiting, and your life is calling. Answer it. Overthinking is stealing the life you could be living, and the worst part is that you may not even realize how much it is costing you. You think you are protecting yourself by analyzing every possibility, considering every outcome, and trying to make the perfect decision. But while your mind is busy trying to control the future, your present is quietly passing you by. You wake up and immediately start thinking. You think about what happened yesterday. You think about what might happen tomorrow. You replay conversations. You imagine problems that haven't happened. You wonder what people think about you. You question whether you're making the right decision. You compare your progress to someone else's. You create one scenario, then another, until your mind is exhausted before you have even taken a single step. And then you call that preparation. But sometimes it's not preparation. Sometimes it's avoidance. You aren't actually moving closer to the life you want. You're simply thinking about moving closer to it. There is a huge difference between reflection and overthinking. Reflection helps you learn. Overthinking keeps you trapped. Reflection asks, what can I learn from this? Overthinking asks, what if everything goes wrong?
Reflection creates a lesson. Overthinking creates another question. And if you allow it to continue, your mind can turn one simple decision into an impossible problem. You want to start something new, but immediately your mind says, what if I fail? You want to speak up, and your mind says, what if they judge me? You want to take a new opportunity, and your mind says, what if this isn't the right time? You want to change your life, and your mind says, what if I can't actually do it? Notice what every question has in common. They are all focused on what could go wrong. You are asking your mind to predict a future that doesn't exist yet, and your mind will gladly give you answers. It will create disasters. It will create rejection. It will create embarrassment. It will create failure. It will create reasons to stay exactly where you are. Because your brain loves certainty. It wants to know what will happen before you act. It wants guarantees before you take risks. It wants to know that everything will work out before you begin. But life doesn't work that way. You don't get certainty first. You take the step, and then you discover what happens. That's how every meaningful chapter of your life begins. You didn't know exactly what your first day of school would feel like. You didn't know exactly how your first job would turn out. You didn't know who you would meet. You didn't know which opportunities would appear. You simply entered the unknown. And somehow you figured things out. That's what you need to remember now. You have survived uncertainty before. You can survive it again. You don't need to know everything before you move forward. You need to trust yourself enough to handle whatever comes next. Because the goal isn't to eliminate every possible problem. The goal is to become someone who knows, if a problem comes, I'll deal with it. That is confidence. Confidence isn't knowing that nothing will go wrong. Confidence is knowing that even if something goes wrong, you won't abandon yourself. You will adapt. You will learn. You will try again. You will keep moving. And that is exactly what overthinking tries to convince you that you cannot do. It tells you that one mistake will destroy everything. It tells you that one rejection defines you. It tells you that one bad decision means you have ruined your future. But that's not reality. Most decisions are not permanent. Most mistakes are not fatal. Most failures are not final. You can change direction. You can learn. You can apologize. You can start again. You can make a better decision with better information. So stop treating every decision like it's a life sentence. Sometimes you simply need to make the best decision you can with the information you have today. Then move, learn, adjust, continue.
Because the truth is, you cannot think your way into a life you are unwilling to act toward. You can visualize your dream, you can write goals, you can create plans, you can watch motivational videos, you can read books, you can make schedules. But eventually, there comes a moment when you have to close the notebook and take action. Your dream doesn't need another thought, it needs movement. And maybe the smallest action feels insignificant. But don't underestimate small actions. One phone call can change a relationship. One application can change your career. One conversation can change your future. One decision can change your direction. 1 hour of focused work can begin something that grows for years. You don't know which small action will become the turning point. That's why you have to stop waiting for the perfect moment. There is no perfect moment. There is only the moment you decide to begin. And if you keep waiting until you feel completely ready, you may wait forever. Because readiness is often created through action. You don't become ready and then begin. You begin, and beginning makes you ready. You take the first step, and the second step becomes clearer. You take the second step, and suddenly you can see something you couldn't see from where you were standing. That's how clarity works. Clarity often comes from movement, not from sitting still and thinking harder. So ask yourself honestly, what have I been overthinking? What decision have I been delaying? What conversation have I been avoiding? What dream have I been postponing? What action do I already know I need to take? You probably know the answer. Deep down, you already know. The problem isn't always that you don't know what to do. Sometimes the problem is that you know exactly what to do, but you're afraid of what happens after you do it. And that's where courage begins. Courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is saying, I'm scared, but I'm going anyway. You don't need to feel fearless. You just need to stop letting fear make every decision for you. Because if fear is always in control, your life will become smaller and smaller. You'll stop trying. You'll stop meeting new people. You'll stop taking opportunities. You'll stop expressing yourself. You'll stop dreaming as boldly as you once did. And eventually, you'll become comfortable with a life you never actually wanted. Don't let that happen. You were not given your life to spend it trapped inside your own thoughts. You were given a life to experience, to learn, to create, to love, to fail, to grow, to discover, to take chances, to become. So get out of your head and back into your life. Put the phone down, take a walk, make the call, send the message, start the project, apply for the opportunity, have the conversation, do the workout, open the book, take the first step. Not because you know exactly where it will lead, but because staying exactly where you are isn't taking you where you want to go. Your life is happening while you're thinking about what to do with it, and you don't get today back. You can always think tomorrow, but you cannot relive today. So don't spend another day rehearsing a life you could actually be living. Take the risk, make the decision, trust yourself, and move. Because somewhere beyond your overthinking is a version of your life that you haven't experienced yet. And you will never meet that version of your life by standing still. You have to go find it. You don't need more clarity. You need to take the first step. You keep telling yourself that once you understand everything, you'll finally move. Once you have the perfect plan, you'll begin. Once you know exactly what will happen, you'll feel confident enough to act. But life doesn't give you that kind of guarantee. Most of the time, clarity doesn't come before action. Clarity comes because of action. You discover the next step by taking the step you're standing in front of right now. Think about how many times you've waited to feel ready. You wanted to start something, but you kept researching. You wanted to make a decision, but you kept asking everyone for advice. You wanted to change your life, but you kept planning the perfect routine. You were convinced you needed more information, but sometimes you don't need more information. You need experience. And experience only comes when you move. Imagine standing at the edge of a dark road at night. You can't see the entire road. You can only see a few feet in front of you. Would you refuse to move because you can't see the entire journey? Of course not. You take a step, then another. And as you move forward, more of the road becomes visible. That's exactly how life works. You don't need to see the entire path. You need enough courage to take the next step. Maybe you're waiting to know whether your idea will work. You won't know until you test it. Maybe you're waiting to know whether the opportunity is right for you. You may not know until you experience it. Maybe you're waiting to know whether you are capable. You discover that by attempting something difficult. Maybe you're waiting to know whether you can change.
You discover that by changing one small behavior today. Stop demanding answers from the future before you're willing to act in the present. Your mind wants certainty because certainty feels safe, but certainty is often impossible. You can plan carefully and still encounter unexpected problems. You can make the perfect decision and still face difficulties. You can choose the right path and still have moments when you doubt yourself. That doesn't mean you've chosen incorrectly. It means you're human. Growth is uncomfortable because you're doing something you've never done before. And when you're doing something new, your brain doesn't have enough evidence to feel completely safe. That's why you may feel nervous. That's why you may doubt yourself. That's why you may suddenly find 100 reasons to wait. But don't confuse discomfort with a wrong decision. Sometimes discomfort is simply the feeling of leaving your old life behind. You have to understand something important. The version of you that wants a different life cannot keep making every decision from the perspective of the old you. If you want different results, you have to start making different choices. And that begins with one small action, not 10 actions, not a complete transformation. 1, ask yourself, what is the smallest thing I can do right now? Not tomorrow, not next week, right now.
If you want to write a book, write one paragraph. If you want to start a business, research one customer problem. If you want to get healthier, take a walk.
If you want to learn a skill, spend 15 minutes practicing. If you want to repair a relationship, send the message. If you want a new career, update one section of your resume. If you want to create content, make the first piece. You don't have to finish the mountain today. You just have to start climbing. And here's what happens when you take that first step. You prove to yourself that you're capable of moving. Then the second step becomes easier, then the third. And eventually, something that once seemed impossible becomes part of your normal life. That's how transformation happens, not through one magical moment, through small decisions repeated consistently. The problem is that people often underestimate the power of a small beginning. They think, if I can't do everything, what's the point of doing something? But that's exactly the mindset that keeps you stuck. You don't need to do everything, you need to do something. One action creates momentum. Momentum creates confidence. Confidence creates more action. And action creates results. But if you stay frozen, nothing changes. You can think about exercising for an hour, but your body doesn't become stronger because you thought about exercising. You can think about writing for an hour, but the page remains blank. You can think about changing your career for months, but your situation remains the same until you do something. Thinking has a purpose, planning has a purpose, reflection has a purpose, but they are tools, not destinations. Eventually, you have to use what you've learned. There is a moment when preparation becomes another excuse. You keep telling yourself you're preparing, but secretly you're afraid of failing, afraid of being judged, afraid of choosing incorrectly, afraid that you'll discover you're not as capable as you hoped. But what if you discover the opposite? What if you discover that you are stronger than you thought? What if you discover that you're capable of learning? What if you discover that the thing you feared wasn't nearly as frightening as you imagined? You won't know until you move. And that's why the first step matters so much. The first step isn't just about making progress toward a goal, it's about changing your relationship with yourself. Every time you say, I'm going to do this, and then actually do it, you build self-trust. You teach your brain, I keep my promises to myself. I can take action even when I'm uncomfortable. I don't need to feel ready. I can figure things out. That is where confidence comes from. Not from thinking positively all day, not from waiting for fear to disappear. Confidence comes from evidence. You become confident because you repeatedly show yourself that you can handle things. So stop asking yourself, how do I become confident enough to start? Ask a better question.
What would I do right now if I trusted myself?
Then do the smallest version of that thing. Maybe trusting yourself means making the phone call. Maybe it means saying no. Maybe it means saying yes. Maybe it means leaving your comfort zone. Maybe it means finally starting the project you've been talking about for months. Whatever it is,
Don't make it complicated. Your next step doesn't need to impress anyone. It only needs to move you forward. And remember this: you don't need permission to begin. You don't need everyone to understand. You don't need to have all the answers. You don't need to know exactly where the road ends. You simply need enough courage for the next few feet. Because your future is not built in giant leaps, it's built in moments like this. The moment you choose action over hesitation, the moment you choose progress over perfection, the moment you choose possibility over fear, the moment you decide that you are no longer going to wait for your life to become easier before you start living it. Take the first step, let the next step reveal itself, then take that one too. And if you make a mistake, learn. If you fail, adjust. If the plan doesn't work, create a better one. If you change your mind, change direction. But don't stay frozen because you can't predict the future. You were never supposed to predict your entire life. You were supposed to live it. So stop waiting for clarity to arrive like a perfect answer. Create clarity through movement. Take the first step, then another, and another. Because one day you'll look back and realize that the life you wanted didn't begin when you finally figured everything out. It began the moment you stopped waiting and moved. Stop treating every thought like it's the truth. Just because a thought appears in your mind doesn't mean it deserves your belief. Your brain produces thousands of thoughts every day. Some are useful, some are random, some are based on old experiences, some are driven by fear, some are assumptions, and some are simply wrong. But too often we treat every thought as if it were a fact. Or you think, I'm going to fail, and suddenly you behave as though failure has already happened. You think, they probably don't like me, and you start pulling away from people. You think, I'm not good enough, and you stop trying. You think, it's too late for me. And you give up on something you haven't even started. The thought appears and you immediately obey it. But here's the question. What if this isn't true? What if it's just fear talking? What if it's an old belief you learned years ago? What if it's your brain trying to protect you from uncertainty? What if you're not actually seeing reality? You are seeing reality through the lens of your past experiences. Your mind is incredibly powerful, but powerful doesn't mean perfect. Your brain is designed to notice danger, predict outcomes, and protect you. That's useful when you're facing a real threat. But sometimes that same system reacts to ordinary life as if everything is an emergency. You send a message and don't get a response. Your mind says, they must be angry with me. You make a mistake at work. Your mind says, everyone thinks I'm incompetent. Rejected. Your mind says, I'll never succeed. You wake up feeling unmotivated. Your mind says, I'm lazy. Notice what happened. Something happened. Then your mind created a story about what it means. The event and the story are not the same thing. Someone didn't respond. That's a fact. They hate me is an interpretation. You made a mistake. That's a fact. I'm a failure is an interpretation. You experienced rejection. That's a fact. I'll never succeed is an interpretation. Learning to separate facts from stories can completely change the way you experience your life. Because you don't have to believe every story your mind tells you. When a negative thought appears, you can pause. You can observe it. You can ask, is this actually true? What evidence do I have? Am I predicting the future? Am I assuming what someone else is thinking? Am I turning one experience into a permanent conclusion? Those questions create space between you and the thought. And that space is powerful because when you have space, you have a choice. You can choose what you believe. You can choose how you respond. You can choose what action you take next. You are not required to obey every thought simply because it is loud. Sometimes the loudest thought in your mind is the one that deserves the least attention. Fear can be loud, self-doubt can be loud, anxiety about the future can be loud, but volume doesn't equal truth. Think about the things you were afraid of 5 years ago. How many of them actually happened? How many things did you worry about that never came true? How many nights did you lose sleep over situations that eventually worked themselves out? How many times did your mind predict disaster, only for reality to turn out completely different? You have evidence from your own life that your thoughts are not always accurate predictions. So why continue treating them like predictions carved into stone? You can have the thought, I can't do this, without accepting it as your identity. You can feel afraid without deciding that you must stop. You can feel uncertain without assuming that you're making the wrong choice. You can feel uncomfortable without running back to your comfort zone. Your feelings are real, but feelings are not always instructions. Fear says, don't go. Growth says, go anyway. Doubt says, you're not ready. Experience says, you'll become ready by doing it. Your mind says, what if you fail? Wisdom asks, what will you learn if you try? That's the conversation you need to start having with yourself. Instead of arguing with every negative thought, simply question it. If your mind says, nobody believes in me, ask, is that actually true? If your mind says, I'm behind everyone else, ask, according to whose timeline? If your mind says it's too late, ask, what makes me certain of that? If your mind says, I always mess things up, ask, always? One word can expose an entire false belief. Always. Never. Everyone. Nobody.
Impossible.
These words often appear when your emotions are taking control of your thinking. You fail once and your brain says, I always fail. You experience rejection once and your brain says, nobody wants me.
You have a difficult day, and your brain says, my life is falling apart.
Slow down. Challenge the language. Challenge the assumption. Challenge the story. Because the story you repeatedly tell yourself eventually becomes the reality you live according to. If you constantly tell yourself you're incapable, you'll stop taking opportunities. If you constantly tell yourself you're unlucky, you'll stop noticing possibilities. If you constantly tell yourself people will reject you, you'll stop reaching out. If you constantly tell yourself you're not enough, you'll spend your life trying to prove your worth instead of recognizing it. Your thoughts influence your actions. Your actions influence your habits influence your life. That's why your inner conversation matters. But don't misunderstand this. The goal isn't to force yourself to think positively every second. You don't need to pretend everything is wonderful. You don't need to suppress difficult emotions. You don't need to say everything is perfect when it isn't. The goal is to think accurately. If something is difficult, acknowledge that it's difficult. Then ask, what can I do about it? That's a much stronger question than, why does everything always happen to me? One question creates helplessness. The other creates responsibility. You cannot control every thought that enters your mind, but you can control which thoughts you feed. Think of your mind like a garden. Thoughts will appear. Some are flowers, some are weeds. You don't have to panic every time you see a weed. You simply decide what deserves your attention. If you repeatedly water thoughts like, I'm not enough, I can't, I'll fail, and it's too late, those thoughts become stronger. But if you begin feeding thoughts like, I can learn, I can try, I can improve, and I can handle the next step, you begin building a different mental environment. This doesn't mean positive thinking magically changes reality. It means your beliefs influence what actions you're willing to take. And action changes reality. If you believe you can learn something, you're more likely to practice. If you believe you can recover from failure, you're more likely to try. If you believe you can handle discomfort, you're more likely to leave your comfort zone. That's why changing your relationship with your thoughts is so important. You don't need to control your mind perfectly. You need to stop allowing every thought to control you. There will still be days when you doubt yourself. There will still be moments when fear appears. There will still be times when you think about quitting. That's normal. The difference is that now you can recognize those thoughts without immediately acting on them. You can say, I'm having the thought that I can't do this. Notice the difference. You didn't say, I can't do this. You said, I'm having the thought that I can't do this. That tiny distinction creates distance. You're observing the thought instead of becoming the thought. And once you create that distance, you can choose your next action. Maybe you take a break. Maybe you ask for help. Maybe you try again. Maybe you change your strategy. Maybe you realize the thought was never true in the first place, but you don't automatically surrender because your life becomes much more powerful when you understand this. You can think a thought without becoming it. You can hear doubt without obeying it. You can experience fear without surrendering to it. You can feel uncertainty without abandoning your goals. And you can have a bad day without deciding that you have a bad life. So the next time your mind gives you a frightening prediction, pause.
Don't immediately believe it.
Ask yourself, is this a fact or a story? Is this happening right now, or am I imagining what might happen? What evidence do I have?
What would I tell someone I love if they were thinking this?
Then choose the next useful action. Not the perfect action, not the action that guarantees success, the next useful action, because you don't need to win an argument with your mind. You simply need to stop letting fear make all your decisions. Your thoughts are visitors. You don't have to invite every one of them to stay. Let the unhelpful ones pass. Keep the lessons, question the assumptions, choose your beliefs carefully, and most importantly, keep moving. Because the moment you stop treating every thought like the truth, you begin to realize something incredibly freeing. You have more control over your life than you thought. Not because you can control everything that happens, but because you can choose what you do with what happens. And that choice can change everything. Make decisions faster and trust yourself again.
One of the biggest reasons people stay stuck isn't that they have no options.
It's that they spend so much time questioning every option that they eventually lose confidence in their ability to choose. You think about the decision, then you think about it again, then you ask someone else, then you search for more information, then you imagine what could go wrong, then you change your mind. Then you start thinking about the original decision again. And before you know it, days, weeks, or even months have passed. The decision hasn't become easier. You've simply become more exhausted. At some point, you have to realize that more thinking doesn't always create more clarity. Sometimes it creates more confusion. You don't need to become reckless. You don't need to make every decision in 30 seconds. But you do need to stop treating every decision as if it requires absolute certainty. Because certainty is rarely available. There will always be another possibility. There will always be another question. There will always be someone with a different opinion. There will always be a reason to wait. If you wait until there is zero risk, zero doubt, and zero uncertainty, you may never move at all. Trusting yourself means accepting that you may not know exactly what will happen, and believing that you can handle what happens next. That's a completely different way of making decisions. Instead of asking, what decision guarantees that everything will work out? Ask, what decision makes the most sense with what I know right now? That's enough. You are allowed to make decisions with incomplete information. You are allowed to choose based on what you know today and adjust tomorrow when you learn something new. You don't need to predict the entire future. You need to make the best decision available to you in the present. And here's where self-trust begins. Self-trust isn't something you magically wake up with one morning. You build it. You build it every time you make a decision and take responsibility for it. You build it every time you keep a promise to yourself. You build it every time you stop asking everyone else for permission. You build it every time you make a mistake and refuse to turn that mistake into a reason to hate yourself. You build it when you realize, I made the wrong choice, but I can handle it. That's powerful. Because trusting yourself doesn't mean believing you'll always make the right decision. It means knowing that even when you make the wrong decision, you won't collapse. You'll learn, you'll adjust, you'll recover, you'll try again. That's real confidence. You don't need a perfect record to trust yourself. You need evidence that you can handle life. Think about how many difficult situations you've already survived. There were moments when you didn't know what to do. There were moments when you were uncertain. There were moments when you thought you couldn't handle something, and yet you're here. You figured things out, maybe not perfectly, maybe not immediately, but you did. So why assume that the next decision has to be perfect? It doesn't. You can make a decision and learn from it. You can change direction. You can correct yourself. You can say, this isn't working, and try something else. Your life isn't a single irreversible path. It's a series of choices, adjustments, lessons, and new choices. Stop putting so much pressure on yourself to get everything right the first time. You don't need perfect decisions. You need decisions that move you forward, because an imperfect decision can give you information. Indecision gives you nothing. Imagine you're trying to choose between two paths. You stand there for months trying to determine which path is perfect. Meanwhile, someone else chooses one, starts walking, discovers what works, learns what doesn't, and adjusts along the way. Who has more information? The person who moved. That's the power of action. Action gives you feedback. You cannot think your way into experience. You have to experience, you have to test, you have to try, and sometimes you have to discover that something isn't for you. That's not failure, that's information. Maybe you thought you wanted something and then you discovered you didn't. Good. Now you know. Maybe you tried something and it didn't work. Good. Now you know what to change. Maybe you trusted someone and they disappointed you. That doesn't mean you can never trust anyone again. It means you learned something about boundaries, judgment, or compatibility. Every experience can teach you something if you stop turning it into a reason to fear your next decision. And that's one of the biggest problems with overthinking. You make one mistake and instead of learning from it, you decide, I can't trust myself. Then the next time a decision appears, you look outside yourself for the answer. You ask friends, you search online, you ask strangers, you look for signs, you keep comparing, you keep waiting. Eventually, you become so dependent on external validation that you don't know what you actually want anymore. That's when you need to come back to yourself. Ask, what do I think? What do I want? What matters to me?
What choice aligns with the person I'm trying to become?
And then listen. You don't have to ignore advice. You don't have to reject other people's experiences. Listen to wise people. Learn from people who have already walked the road. But don't surrender your entire decision-making ability to someone else. Other people can give you information. They cannot live your life for you. You are the one who has to wake up with the consequences of your choices. So you need to develop the courage to make your own decisions. Start small. You don't rebuild self-trust through one massive life decision. You rebuild it through everyday choices. Choose what time you're going to wake up. Choose what you're going to work on. Choose what you're going to say no to. Choose what you're going to prioritize. Choose what you're going to stop doing. Then follow through. Every time you make a small decision and honor it, you send yourself a message. I can count on me. That message matters. Because when you trust yourself, you stop needing constant reassurance. You stop asking, do you think I'm doing the right thing? You start asking, does this feel right for me? You stop obsessing over every possible outcome. You start focusing on what you can control. You stop waiting for someone to tell you that you're ready. You decide that you're ready enough to begin, and sometimes you won't feel confident. Do it anyway. Confidence is not a requirement for action. Often, confidence is the result of action. You take the step, you survive it, you learn from it, and your brain says, maybe I can. Then you take another step, and eventually you stop needing to convince yourself. You have evidence, you've done difficult things before, you've made decisions before, you've recovered before, you've grown before, so you can do it again. The next time you find yourself stuck between endless options, give yourself a deadline. Say, I'm going to gather the information I need, and then I'm going to decide. Then decide. Don't reopen the case every 5 minutes. Once you've made a reasonable decision, give yourself permission to move forward, because constantly reconsidering every decision drains your energy. You cannot build a great life while spending all your mental energy wondering whether you should have chosen differently. Learn to choose, learn to commit, learn to adjust. That's the rhythm. Choose, act, learn, adjust, continue. You don't need to know whether your decision will be perfect. You need to know that you're willing to take responsibility for it. That's freedom. And here's something else. You are not required to explain every decision to everyone. Sometimes people won't understand. Sometimes they will disagree. Sometimes they will tell you that they would do something different. That's okay. They are living their life. You are living yours. You don't need universal approval to make a personal decision. You need self-respect, you need honesty, you need courage, and you need the willingness to accept the consequences of your choices without constantly blaming yourself. So start trusting yourself again, not blindly, intentionally. Listen to yourself, learn from yourself, keep promises to yourself, and when you make a mistake, don't destroy your confidence. Use the mistake as information. Tell yourself, I made a choice, I learned something, now I know more than I knew before. That's how strong people think. They don't expect themselves to be perfect. They expect themselves to keep learning. And that mindset changes everything. Because the goal isn't to become someone who never makes a wrong decision. The goal is to become someone who isn't afraid of making one. Someone who knows, I can handle the consequences. I can correct my course. I can start again. I can figure this out. That is self-trust. So stop waiting for certainty. Stop asking everyone else to choose your life for you. Stop reopening decisions you've already made. Gather the information, listen to your intuition, consider the consequences. Make the best choice you can, then move. Because your life is not waiting for you to become a perfect decision maker. It's waiting for you to become willing to decide. Trust yourself enough to take the next step. And if the path changes, you change with it. That's not weakness, that's wisdom, that's growth, that's life. So take a moment and ask yourself, how much longer are you going to wait? How much longer are you going to let fear disguise itself as overthinking? How much longer are you going to analyze every possibility, question every decision, and postpone the life you know you want? You don't need another perfect plan. You don't need complete certainty. You don't need permission. You need to begin. Your life is not waiting for the perfect version of you.